the NCTA O&M Committee Private Car Management Overview of Railroad Damaged Equipment webinar. We are going to be hearing from Brandon Infelice from RAS Data Services today. And to get started, though, I'm going to introduce John Ward, our Executive Director, and he is going to go over the antitrust for us.
Thank you, Kathy. Just a gentle reminder for everyone regarding anti-competitive behavior. In pursuing lawful cooperation, assistance, and exchange of ideas, association members must be aware of antitrust laws. In any gathering of competitors, suppliers, and customers, we must be mindful to avoid discussions on prices, allocations of territories, excluding or limiting dealings with suppliers or customers, or broadly speaking, any discussions that are intended to or may have the effect of restricting competition in any sense. NCTA folks do a good job of being mindful of this, and I don't think today's conversation is going to go in that way, but it's a helpful reminder to always keep in the back of our heads. So thank you very much for that bit of housekeeping, and I'll kick it back to Kathy now to introduce our guest speaker.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thanks, John. Before we get started completely, I do have a couple of announcements I'd like to make. First of all, well, I'd like to thank the O&M Committee, Webinar Committee, the O&M. We have several committees underneath the main O&M Committee, and so our Webinar Committee is headed up by Todd Booth, and William Walker also assists him. So without all of our committees, we wouldn't be able to be as successful and provide as much information to everyone in the industry as we're able to. So also, I do have one other announcement. I just want to make sure I get it in here, that December 21st is the deadline to get the UMLR data for anyone who's a private car owner. You know who you are when you can turn in your UMLR information. And so just remember that December 21st is the deadline to get it to Melinda. And so now I'm going to go ahead and introduce Brandon. So Brandon is happily married with 3 girls, ages 17, 14, and 6. And they currently reside in the southwest suburbs of Chicago. He holds a BA from Eastern Illinois University and has been in rail for about 10 years. In total, the last 7 with RAS Data Services. He currently serves as Senior Manager of Contract Shop Rail Services, and a good majority of his day-to-day duties are managing railroad damaged cars for clients, which include operating lessors, lessees, owners, and shippers. He is a lifelong sports fan, enjoying golfing, fishing, and barbecuing. And spending time with his wife and kids. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Brandon, and then we will have a question and answer time period after he finishes his presentation.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you to the NCTA, Melinda, Todd, Kevin. It's very kind of you to invite me. This is an honor, and I will do my best to represent and hopefully be informative without dredging and boring. And obviously, this is a topic that you could take a long time to discuss. So one of the hurdles that I encountered was trying to be informative, but not too brief at the same time. So with that said, I have to thank my coworkers and colleagues over the years that have taught me a lot about railroad damaged cars and the processes, and it is a team effort. So the user manuals, the field manuals, the office manuals, they're very complex, and it's great to be able to work with folks internally and externally as a team to figure things out and work through these processes. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I'll share with you. And then my goal is to get through it pretty quickly so that I can be available for questions and answers. And then I'm going to make myself available to everybody here. RAS Data Services is a member of the NCTA committee. So I'm going to urge you to reach out to me individually and let me know how I can help and when I can help. So if you bear with me for a moment. Hopefully you folks are seeing the presentation. Can you confirm that?
Not yet, no. So the share screen.
So I did do the share screen,
There you go. There you go.
and we are going to go.
Perfect.
And my name is Brandon Infelice. I'm the Senior Manager of Contract Shop Services at RAS Data Services. I've been here a little over 7 years. Some of the presentation hurdles we talked about was trying to fit a very large topic into a very short window. So there are times where this hopefully doesn't appear choppy, but the intention was to maybe address some of the dig-in points at the end. So here is an overview of some of the items that we're going to talk about today. RailLink, damage and defective car tracking system, overview of AAR Rule 95 and Rule 107, handling of documented damage versus undocumented damage, AAR settlement value statements, which I self-admittedly fall into the trap of calling depreciated value statements. It's a common misconception. Handling of destroyed cars, and where the railroad offers settlement in DDCT versus cars that are deemed repaired by the railroad, but then sent home for further inspection. Most people are familiar with the term JIC, that's a Joint Inspection Certificate. We'll go through some of the basic management and then proper usage of when a supplemental JIC is or is not warrantable. Obviously, as a third party, RAS Data Services doesn't own any cars, so my job is to always work with the car owners to make the decisions together. We'll go through an overview of the AAR Price Master and the 500 byte data file generation. We'll touch a little bit on car repair billing data exchange requirements. Obviously, the handling of AAR exceptions and rejection letters is usually a pretty hot topic. A couple of miscellaneous items, and then of course, again, a Q&A session at the end. So RailLink, as most of you know, is the technical arm of the AAR, the Association of American Railcars. It's a web-based program. When you sign up, you get a user ID and a password, and that gives you an array of programs. Most of you are familiar with UMLR, etc. Damage and defective car tracking is one of those. So DDCT, it also is referred to as DDCTS in a portion of the system. So damaged cars are handled in accordance with AAR Rule 107, and AAR Interchange Rule 95 is used for any damaged equipment that can be returned to service. So we'll go through the difference of some of those. Obviously, railroads provide basic details regarding the location, the date, the load status, stick code in regards to if and when a car is damaged. From there, the railroads and the car owners together determine what the value of the car is, and then ultimately what the next step is for the fate of that rail car. Rule 95 in DDCT is notification of misuse. Rule 95 spells out handling and or delivering line responsibility, 95A handling line, and 95B delivering line. As you get into trying to figure out where you're going with the management of the car, you'll have to refer back to the office manual and the field manual, and we'll go through that a little bit later. When a Rule 107 is issued in DDCT by the railroad, it's also a notification of misuse, but now it allows the owners and railroads to communicate regarding additional information. So some of the things that I had said earlier, value of the car, load status, Obviously, it's important to know if the car can travel on its own wheels or not, and then requesting and providing actual depreciated value / settlement value, and then home shop disposition. So one of the main topics that I run into on a day-to-day basis is documented damage versus undocumented damage. So I put a little clause here, hey, what are you doing on this one? Because that's how most of the emails I receive start. What do you have? So the first question is, has the damage been reported in DDCT by the damaging carrier? And then depending on the answer of yes or no, determines what steps we take to do further research. But in either case, we want to know who reported it to the car owner. Was it the industry? Was it the lessee? Was it maybe local railroad via email or phone? From there, we're going to research. We're going to look at email chatter, no bill data that may possibly have come across through data exchange. We're going to ask questions about whether the damage was discussed with or reported to the delivering carrier by anybody, because we want to establish documentation on that damage in real time before any decisions are made, before cars start moving. Obviously, the next questions are, where is the car currently? When was it last moved? What's the extent of the damage? Can we get photos? Can we determine how old the damage is? And then, of course, are we going to get the car to a home shop or not for further review? With that, we also want to know, just on the eyeball test, does the damage conform to Rule 95B or not? Because if it's undocumented damage and it meets certain criteria, then really the car shouldn't be moving without a defect card. So it's important that we reach out to the carrier to discuss that it will be moving on their lines, and that we're pretty sure that there's 95B damage, which we'll get into exactly what 95B is and the parameters. And then the question I have to ask myself at the end is, did I personally reach out to the carrier or carriers in question? And if not, I want to make sure I gather the information that I have, or the information that we don't have, and we approach them as such. So in order to do any of that, we generally have to have an understanding of what AAR depreciated value or settlement value is on a misused car. So establishing and determining the AAR depreciation value of a rail car is basically the reproduction value of that rail car adjusted for depreciation up to the date of the damage. Now, sometimes the damage date isn't exactly known, so we're working with whatever the original notification date was. That's all based on an annual rate of depreciation, which is shown in the AAR office manual and field manual. It's a lot of pages in there. There's a ton of charts. I won't go too far in because we're working with aluminum coal cars here for the majority of this audience, but when you get into covered hoppers and tank cars, there's charts in regards to linings and the dates and the different depreciations, and is the car in a corrosive service or not. So it's a day's worth of topics just going through some of those charts. So without digging too deep, I wanted to just kind of paint a broad brush. UMLR and DDCT, they both play a role in finding out in determining the depreciation values. So items that the car owner has to enter into UMLR are original costs, the built date, the rebuilt date, any additions and betterments. Some of those items we talked about in the charts on the AAR office manual, the AAR cost factors, some of the formulas. Those are all calculations that make up what the value of the car is in the eyes of the AAR. At the end of the day, the AAR DV helps the railroads, the car owners, and folks like myself, again, decide what the fate of that car is. In fact, as many of you know, sometimes the cars never make it to home shop. The railroad takes a look at the extent of damage versus what we tell them the DV is, and they make a decision on the spot just to scrap the car. However, if it does get sent home, there's still an option that it's quite possibly not going to be repaired. That's part of the review process post JIC endorsement. If we do repair the car, the DV figure is very important because that tells us how much we potentially can rebill to the damaging carrier. Or if we were to scrap the car, there's a separate calculation once that car is at shop that will determine how much we can rebill the railroad. On a basic level, the handling of the settlements that are offered versus cars deemed repairable is based on when we have documented damage. So the railroad reaches out and says, we've misused your car, we need to know what the value is, and then we need to make the determination. So if the railroad has deemed the car destroyed, then upon receipt of the DV or the AAR settlement value in DDCT from folks like myself or yourself, the railroad may offer settlement. And if they do, the car owner has the ability to review and accept the settlement offer and bill for the value of the car. The car owner also has the ability to reject the settlement offer. And in the event that you reject the settlement offer, you go into a different category, and the car owner has some certain responsibilities there. Again, all laid out in the office manual. Should the settlement be accepted and you agree that the car should be scrapped and you're going to bill it out, the railroad's responsible for contacting you folks to manage transloads, commodity claims, etc. All of that's managed outside of the DDCT and the JIC process in RailLink. When the railroad offers settlement and settlement is accepted, they have to manage the scrapping of the car. So the calculation for what you as the car owner would rebill takes into consideration that they're going to be scrapping the car. So they have to manage the dismantling. So there is no scrap credits that you would potentially have to give to them. In the event that the railroad deems the car repairable, then we're gonna go to the AAR office manual under Rule 107. And again, that's a day's topic of what needs to happen, the timeframes involved. But in a basic sense, and again, we're working mainly with aluminum coal cars here, but when I have to pick a home shop for non-aluminum coal cars, I need to know what's the commodity in the car, what's the car type, is it lined? All of those things are going to determine, again, based on geographic location so if you have a line car or a tank car, you might have to start narrowing down your shop options because of parties that are willing to accept the car or parties that are willing to even manage the damaged portion. Once you establish a potential shop, I personally like to reach out to the shop to see if they're willing to take it. I don't want to send a car to a shop just to find out that they're overloaded and then I've made things worse for them and they're going to have a tough time meeting maybe inspection and JIC preparation guidelines. So I've just found a good practice per a directive from one of my coworkers who taught me that it's in your best interest and their best interest to always reach out first. Once we do secure some a commitment from said shop, then you have the responsibility to go and update DDCT and RailLink. Now I have to advise the railroad where the home shop disposition is. There's also an opportunity to put in a secondary disposition. Should there be an issue where the first shop can't accept it. As some of you know, some of these cars cannot travel to shop on their own wheels. So they might have to be loaded up on wreck haulers. So the railroads have to manage the clearance and bridges and waivers. And from time to time, they'll come back to yourself or myself, and they'll say, hey, we would have liked to send the car where you asked us to, but we have a restriction. We can't go that route. Can you find another shop? So in the event that the DDCT record goes through and there are no issues, then I'll generally create a bad order in our system, or a customer will create a bad order in their own system, just to notify everybody internally or externally where the car is at, where it's supposed to go, and then add it to some sort of tracking program. So where I'm at with RAS Data Services, I manage JICs and estimate reviews in DDCT for an awful lot of customers. So email alone or a spreadsheet alone isn't going to manage everything. So we did have to come up with some sort of tracking tool for cars en route to shops, cars at shops where maybe they've been inspected, but JICs haven't been submitted. And then a section for JICs that have been submitted that have not been endorsed yet by a railroad, or maybe the cars that have been endorsed, but I don't yet have estimates from the shops. So it's a working file that unfortunately you can't use Railink to track a lot of this post disposition. So in combination with your own tracking system, a bad order system, and then DDCT, again, if all the damage that is reported comes through the proper channels, it's supposed to be a very transparent system. The problem is not all damaged cars get documented. So when you know what you are dealing with, it's obviously very easy to track it. When you don't know what you're dealing with, that's where you have to start questions and backtracking. And a lot of times we're dependent on the lessees or the shippers or the railroads involved to help, fill in those gaps. Obviously, once the disposition has been given to the shop and they have made the assumption that it's going to go to shop, they're responsible for making either temp repairs for the cars to be safe to travel, again, or load the car up and move it to a home shop. I wasn't going to go through every single timeline involved in I have to give disposition in this date and they have to move the car in that date, because it is a sliding scale. And if you have a decent relationship with the carrier that you're working with, you might reach out to them and say, I'm going to need a few more days than what the book allows here. And they might come back to you and say, you've always been upfront with us. We're going to be upfront with you. We're probably not going to get that car loaded up in 30 days. It might take us 20 days to get the car safe to transport where they can move it to a spot where we could load it up. But the flat cars aren't available for, say, 60 days. There are timelines that they have to follow on the railroad side as well. But if you have a good relationship and you keep communication open, I found that's the best way to kind of compromise for everybody. Going back to the shop selection itself, I think it's super important for anybody that's not in the railroad damage process from A to Z. It's really important that you're selecting home shops that, again, are A, willing to work the railroad damage cars, but B, do quality repairs, and then C, have a good track record of understanding AAR billing, because it is completely different than generic contract shop billing. In my experience, throw in a third level of complexity, and that's aluminum coal cars. It's to be frank, it's a completely different animal when you're billing, and not everybody is an expert in it. So that's what makes the great shops great, and that's what makes the not so great shops at times very cumbersome to work with AAR billing. The unfortunate part is we don't, whether you own the car or you're representing the people that manage it, you don't always get to choose where the car goes. Sometimes it just shows up unannounced, or it gets sent to a shop for a generic bad order, and the shop stumbles into the railroad damage. So communication with the shops, that's also a key part of, kind of managing the process from A to Z. It takes an army. in order to keep it all straight. So when you're working with good shops and you're working with communicative people at the railroads, it makes things much easier. The next portion is, let's assume the car gets to a home shop, and then now we have a bunch of things that we have to do. The shop has timelines and guidelines. Somebody like myself or yourself, we have guidelines. A JIC, the Joint Inspection Certificate, that has to be prepared within 30 days of arrival. Generally, once the car arrives the home shop, there should be some sort of notification from the shop to the car owner. If there's a DDCT record available, the shop should be reporting the car on hand, and it should be sending a notification to the proper parties, and or going to some sort of software system to announce an arrival date on a bad order. That way, the car owner, the shop, and then a third party like myself that's responsible for the management of this, we're all aware on day one that the clock has started on the JIC timeline. In quick order, the shop should be able to get a pretty good understanding of if there is a defect card available, if DDCT records are available, if there's confusion in regards to who's responsible for the damage. All of that should be discussed within pretty quick time of the arrival. So if there are questions or there is backtracking, we can do that all while not expiring on the JIC deadline, which again, I like to have the JIC submitted within 20 days of arrival. Not every shop can get a JIC prepared within that time frame. The JIC, or Joint Inspection Certificate, in itself it's a pretty vague document. I thought about going to the AAR manual and pulling a copy of it and then putting it in here, but I wasn't sure if there were any copyright infringements or anything such as that. So each shop can prepare their own Joint Inspection Certificate to the way they see fit, but it's basically an assessment of everything that they think was either bent, broke, or went missing during that incident. Once the Joint Inspection Certificate gets filled out and submitted, there can be a negotiation between somebody like myself or the car owner and then said railroad to determine what was or what was not damaged during the incident. I think the hardest part for everybody is none of us are there in real time. There's not video footage to show every single component on a rail car that was or wasn't misused. So there has to be a little bit of give and take at times too, depending on the extent of damage, the age of damage. And most of the time, I think the railroads understand that the shops are working with a lot of unknowns. They weren't there. So they're giving their best assessment of what happened during that incident. Again, this whole process becomes a lot easier if the damage is documented from the beginning. When it's undocumented damage, then you start getting into questions in regards to what is the extent of the damage. And this is where there's a difference between Rule 95A and Rule 95B. Rule 95A is a carrier acknowledging that they've misused the car, whether it's a sideswipe or a derail or an overspeed impact event. They're telling the car owner, we've misused your car. Let's have a conversation about that damage at a future point in time. When a car arrives to industry or a home shop and there's undocumented damage, obviously you want to do what you can in your research to identify the responsible party. So looking at no bill data, looking at closed DDCT records, potentially contacting lessees, industries, getting information about maybe the last route, when was the last inspection on that car, etc. And then depending on the age of the damage, you might have a discussion about, does this qualify as 95B cardable undocumented damage? Just as if two railroads are interchanging a car and one stops the car in interchange and says, I'm sorry, I can't accept that car. It has cardable defects. There's a hole in the side sheet, or the side sill is buckled 4 inches. There's no electronic defect card in the system. I can't accept this car. So they would actually reject that car back to the other interchange party, and they would have to issue the defect card. When the car gets to home shop, if there is no defect card and the damage meets 95B criteria, then the question is the delivering carrier going to be the one responsible for that damage? Responsible car owners will review no bill data, the age of the damage. They'll run a gamut of checklists before they submit a JIC under 95B as what's commonly referred to as like a hot potato JIC. So if there's other fingerprints on there to say, hang on, maybe we should be going to talk to our people. It looks like this damage is 3 years old, and maybe the car's been loaded and unloaded 100 times. It could open up a discussion for multiple parties to say, is this something we even want to pursue challenging a railroad with? I think the caveat to that is we all know that just like at times there's damage that's undocumented that happens maybe out on the rail. There's also damage that happens in plants or at industry or maybe a third party. And sometimes that doesn't always get reported accordingly too. So we can't just always assume that undocumented damage is railroad responsibility. But it's an individual one-on-one car by car scenario. And again, somebody like myself and the car owner has to determine what's the best course of action. So that would really probably be bullet point 4 there, 95B. If the damage is warrantable, do we want to submit a JIC or not? The JIC, the preparation, the timeline, the submissions, that's all outlined in the office manual, the AAR office manual in regards to the timelines. But in a generic setting, the JIC has to be submitted within 30 days of arrival. You have to follow findus.rail in RailLink to determine the appropriate party where the JIC should be submitted. In the event that there is not a JIC contact for said railroad and findus.rail, I'll usually defer to my own contact list or maybe a non-JIC contact, maybe a generic customer service or a generic DDCT contact. But if a defect card is available, the defect card should be sent with the JIC submission. The AAR guidelines also say that there has to be a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 10 photos. In my experience, I have found that some railroads appreciate if you send more than 10 photos, especially if it's maybe really, really heavy damage where there's a lot of major components that they would like to check off the list before they endorse the JIC. So in my experience, I find it's best to follow the AAR rules, and I'll send the JIC and the defect card if available, and then the 10 best photos that I have. And then maybe in a secondary email, I'll say, FYI, here's the other 25 photos that the shop has sent. I find that does 2 things. One, the AAR rule says that the railroads have X time in order to respond to said JIC, which is 30 days. I think it makes the railroad's job a lot easier if you give them more on the front end so that they don't have to come back to somebody like myself or a shop 20 days later and say, you know, you sent me 10 photos and I appreciate it, but there's about 6 or 7 major components that I don't have photos of. Can you go and get them? So then that's more time that you're taking from the shop or from out of service time to go and secure them, send them to the railroad. They might need another week or 2 or 3 before they respond. So you can cut out a lot of that back and forth by just assessing the amount of damage and then maybe providing additional photos on the front end. Obviously, JICs, joint inspection certificates are, it's a negotiable document that gets sent over. So the railroads might not agree with the shop's assessment. They might review their own internal records from the incident and say, well, we don't show what you show. And then there has to be some sort of further discussion about why we believe said damage in question is warrantable. Maybe it mimics the same age, or it's in comparison to the same location, etc. But in the event that the railroad does not respond to a joint inspection certificate, then you have the ability to trace the joint inspection certificate, but it has to be within certain timelines. A railroad has 30 days to review and respond, and if they don't, then you trace it. You cannot trace the JIC for another 30 days after that. Going back to the tracking software, if you're working with a lot of damaged cars and a lot of JICs, 30 days can go by really quick. And then it could be day 60 and a shop reaches out and say, hey, did you hear back? Well, if you're not in the system to set for yourself to do your own follow-ups, then you could be putting yourself out of date, and you realize I should have traced that JIC much sooner. So I try to give it 32 days on average after JIC submission before I trace. More times than not, you'll get the JIC response within that first 60 days. If you don't, there are provisions for a third trace. And then in the AAR office manual, there's an outline for what is potentially considered an auto endorsement option. So in the event that you or I submit a JIC and the railroad just never responds, and we follow the traces accordingly and we document, an auto endorsement can be enforced. And that's there to protect the car owner, but it's also there to protect the shop. They shouldn't have to sit on a car for 6, 7, 8 months while there is no response. I have, knock on wood, never had to use the auto endorsement, but that also doesn't mean I've always gotten JICs back within that 90 to 120 days. Sometimes you have to negotiate, and it depends on a car by car basis. But as information that there is an auto endorsement should you not be getting any responses at all. One of the things that comes up is a supplemental JIC and when it is warrantable and when it is not warrantable. And the supplemental JIC in the AAR office manual, a supplemental JIC is warrantable for items that were damage that was hidden at the time of the initial inspection. So that's not something that's warrantable for maybe an inspector at a shop missing damage that was blatantly obvious. So at times I have had shops reach out to me and say, hey, we're mid-production on this car, and we found out we made a mistake and we left off a top cord or a coupler, or, well, those are things that would have been visibly available to the inspector to see. So they're not warrantable for a supplemental JIC. But again, if you have a decent relationship with the carrier, you might be able to reach out and say, I know a supplemental JIC is not warrantable here, but Jim or Joe at the shop that I'm working with, they're not in the habit of making mistakes and they miss something. Would you consider endorsing a supplemental JIC, even though we all know you don't have to? And I have to be honest with you, I've had really good success with most of the carriers coming back and saying, sure, no problem, we get it. Sometimes it's easier to write everything that isn't bent, broke, or missing during some of these major derailments. So send the supplemental JIC over. We're still happy to pay for that damage. However, supplemental JICs are submitted all the time for what would be considered warrantable hidden damage. I see it a lot on tank cars, maybe a jacketed tank car that you don't have the approval to work the car yet, so you haven't disassembled it. Maybe you haven't gotten the approval to clean the car yet, so you haven't been able to safely enter the vessel to inspect it. And only after the original JIC is endorsed and the car gets cleaned and the jacket gets taken off, does the shop say, well, now we have a dent in the tank shell. That's an item that would be hidden, and you can submit the supplemental JIC. There's obviously many options for supplemental JICs. Plenty of things can be hidden, but again, it's a one-by-one basis or excuse me, on a car by car basis. So supplemental JICs don't come up often, but they can be a bit tricky. And as long as you're stopping production and you're taking photos and you can prove that the damage was hidden, I've had really good success in getting supplemental JICs endorsed. We did talk about bullet point 8 a little bit, findus.rail. That's a fluid moving system that RailLink uses to track and discuss and notify everybody. It's really important that findus.rail is updated by all parties, whether you're the car owner or you're a mark owner or you're the railroad or a third party like us. It just makes everybody's job easier when they know who to go to, where to go to, when to go to them, and it cuts down on a lot of the confusion. The tools to track status, again, everybody probably has some sort of system that they use to manage their own metrics. I have an adopted spreadsheet from one of my colleagues that does a great job of letting me track, again, all the cars that are en route to shop. So I can follow up on them, not only with the railroads, maybe even the customers. We said we were going to send the car to XYZ for inspection, and it's not uncommon for a car to get pushed back into service. Maybe the car was damaged by the railroad. They deemed it safe to travel on its own wheels to industry to unload. And then the intent was for it to go to a home shop. But it got to industry, it unloaded, and then it got turned around and loaded 15 minutes later and was right out the door. So it's not uncommon for cars to travel for weeks, months, or years with damage, but everybody has to be cognizant that there are time frames that you have to abide by. So you can let damaged cars run, and if they're safe, they're okay to use them, but there is an expiration date on a defect card of 48 months. So I find that it's best to pick away at cars that are in service and have them inspected, and then make the determination, is it worth it to pull the car from service, especially on some of the cars that were damaged maybe 36, 37, 38 months ago. If that car's not set for a lease release for, say, 3 years, is it possible that it might not go to a certified home shop in the time frame needed? But at the same time, how bad's the damage? Is it just cosmetic? Is it worth your time to pull the car from service and lose maybe rent abatement or lose utilization for what could end up being maybe a $600 repair or a $900 repair? I have some car owners that say, just let it, the time and energy to pull that car from service. If we catch it before the defect card expires, if we don't, we're just going to move on. So, that can be a car owner decision as well. When you're going through the joint inspection certificate process, the submissions and the negotiations, obviously it's very technical. There's a lot of rules that can be used for you or against you. Rules can be interpreted differently. I think if you have good relationships and the communication is there, then a lot of times you're negotiating under what I like to say is the spirit of the rule. And if the car owner and the railroad and third party like myself are all having a healthy discussion, and everybody understands what the rules are, I think it's very easy at times for all parties to be able to set the AAR rules aside on a car by car basis and maybe do what's best for all parties on an individual car. So there might be an option for the car owner to submit a JIC and get endorsement, but off thread, they'll come and say, you know what, this is just one of those times where we don't really think that the railroad has the right fingerprints here. We're going to absorb this internally, or maybe we're going to go and have a discussion with our own customer and try to remind them that to notify us when they find this damage, especially in the event that it's undocumented damage and it's really, really old. The longer that car runs with that undocumented damage, the harder it is to go back and try to hold a party responsible. And I can't blame a carrier if they say, I don't really feel comfortable being held responsible here when, I can look at the sightings and see that the car's been loaded 100 times and it's been on 15 different railroads easily since that damage occurred. So I think a lot of times it comes down to how does the car owner want to manage it when it's undocumented? Again, all based on spirit of the rules. And again, point 11, which would be relationships. Once the car gets to home shop, somebody like myself, again, I don't own the car. So I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm going to submit the JIC. I'm going to track it. I'm going to negotiate it. I'm going to get it endorsed. And then once it's endorsed, I'm going to send a copy to the car owner. I'm going to send a copy to the shop. That way, everybody knows we have a railroad that agrees with X, Y, and Z damage on that endorsed JIC. From there, the shop has to provide the car owner with an AAR Responsibility 3 estimate. That's all based on the AAR office manual and job code protocols and processes, and some are net applied job codes. Some are miscellaneous material job codes. The aluminum coal car shops that I work with that manage railroad damaged cars, generally they have 1 or 2 or 3 people that are very, very knowledgeable in AAR pricing, and they make my job a little bit easier. There's less for me to question in regards to maybe what will or will not be paid when you go to rebill the damaging carrier. But before you can determine if you're going to repair the car or scrap the car, be a discussion in regards to what's that car worth. And that takes you back again to the AAR settlement value, again, commonly referred to by myself and others as the depreciated value of the car. And once the car on a scrap it, what's our current book value of that car? What's the demand of the car? What other programs or projects do we have associated here? So if you have, let's say, an AAR DV on a car that's worth $50,000, and you have $40,000 worth of railroad damage, it would generally make sense to repair that. But if you have a book value internally that says I only have $30,000 into that car, that might swing your decision to repair the car or not. It also might be based on what other programs or projects or non-railroad damage repairs are needed. So that car might get to the home shop, and in addition to the $40,000 worth of railroad damage, you might have $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, $12,000 worth of program work, project work, AAR FRA work. So you have to take an overall assessment of that shop event and then make a decision to repair the car or scrap the car. The scope of work that one can follow, that changes from customer to customer. So in the aluminum coal car world, it's a little bit different than maybe in freight cars or tank cars, but there is some flexibility in how you can repair a car. One car owner might say that they are okay with a side-swiped tank car jacket, just having an insert replaced, where another car owner might say, I need to have the whole ring replaced from noon to 6. So the same damage, 2 different car owners, the scope of work could change dramatically. And that actually then would change the AAR estimate dramatically as well. So the scope of work can be negotiated by the car owner in the shop to determine how that car is going to be repaired. And that too can ultimately affect the overall damage estimate that you're working with. Original construction, OEM, that's what everybody would like to see for the most part. But it's preference based on if you're the owner or the lessor or the lessee. Obviously, when the railroad makes temp repairs to get the car to home shop, they are then party to endorsing the full repairs for those temp repairs. So although they may have spent money to get the car to Home Shop and they'll supply you with the data to support the repairs that were made, you have every right to change those temporary repairs back to full repairs. Obviously, the car owner has the option to repair the car. They also have the option to scrap the car. And that is based on not only the AARDV value of the car, but that's an internal business decision. There's nothing in the rules that says that you have to repair a car if the damage value estimate comes in lower than the AAR depreciated value. You can actually get the JIC endorsed and then elect to not repair the car and bill for up to what those repairs would have been. So in layman's terms, let's say the AARDV is $50,000 and you have $40,000 worth of railroad damage, assuming that there are no owner lessee items to take into effect there, you can actually scrap the car and bill the railroad as a joint dismantled unit for up to that $40,000 worth of repairs and not repair the car. So just be cognizant that there's nothing that says that you have to repair the car, and vice versa. If the responsibility 3 estimate that comes in from the shop, the AAR estimate, exceeds the DV value of the car, there's nothing in the rules that says you have to scrap the car. If you'd prefer to come out of pocket to make the additional repairs to save the car, you're allowed to do so, but you can't bill more than the DV of the car if it was repaired. Again, the AAR settlement value, excuse me. So once a decision has been made, whether you're going to repair the car or scrap the car, it obviously has to go through a number of processes. If it's repaired, you're going to track that through the shop event. Every car owner has their own determination of what they want to see. Maybe the car needs to be held for inspection. Maybe there's obviously paperwork that has to be filled out and submitted. Whatever your preferences are. But if the car gets released, then the next question is how do we get this car rebuilt to the railroad? Obviously, the car owner has to pay the shop for the repairs that were done. And then there's a process for rebilling the damaging carrier. I have the luxury after the shop is invoicing to pretty much set myself aside. And there's a whole team of people here at RAS Data Services that then spin the data and process the invoice to the shop and then set the railroad rebilling up. Those people have a job that is very important because there's just as many technicalities for losses in that process as there in say not submitting the JIC on time. So you could very easily have a railroad that agrees, yes, I misused the car and I'm responsible for that $55,000 in damage. But if I don't do my job correctly, they have the ability to decline the JIC. And then I would have to go to the car owner or the customer and say, I'm sorry, I fumbled the ball here and I lost you $55,000. Knock on wood, that hasn't happened to me, but my coworkers and colleagues or your coworkers and colleagues, if they're responsible, they, at the end of the process, have to rebuild the railroad. And if they don't follow the specific AAR guidelines, then they're privy to getting an email that says this has been rejected. And then we have to have a discussion about how you're not recouping your money because we didn't follow a particular guideline. So I'm going to briefly touch on what some of those, I guess, pitfalls would be on incorrect billing. And that's not following proper timelines. For the most part, I believe is the culprit. Submitting things out of date. There is I won't go into each and every timeline, but there is a specific set of guidelines and timelines for rebilling. And if you don't rebill within a certain time, they do have the ability to reject. And unless you're working with a carrier that's willing to go outside of the AAR guidelines, then there's a possibility that they're just not going to pay that bill. At the end of the day, you still have to pay the shop for the car repairs that were made. But it's a it's a different process than what I'm involved in, but it's very, very complex. And I have a good knowledge and understanding of it, but I wouldn't say I'm the foremost expert here at RAS Data Services to tell you that. So I do depend on my coworkers to follow through on all of that. If and when the car is repaired and that car is released, the shops and the car owners, they have their own processes for managing invoices, turnaround times, payments, again, software inspection reports. Manage that as you see fit with your own shop network. The AAR estimates themselves that come from the shops, those are all based on, again, the endorsed JIC, what was covered, the AAR labor rates, whether an item was net applied or not. There are times where a shop may lose money on a component that they purchase because the AAR office manual says you can charge X for labor and X for material on said component, but the shop may have actually paid the vendor more than what they're able to rebill. So at times there might be a shop that will come to the owner and say, we would like to discuss a loss with you. I say manage that as you see fit. Your shop is your partner. You depend on them to help you manage railroad damaged cars. You want them to continue to take railroad damaged cars for you. If you send them an absolute ridiculous amount of work, bread and butter work, bad orders, programs, projects, lease returns, it might be easier for them to say, we're going to eat the loss on this car. But if they don't, or they barely broke even on the car, I think it's appropriate that they can discuss that loss with you. Job codes, all of that is in the AAR office manual. Once the railroad is rebuilt, they're going to audit based off of all of that. Very, very important that the shops that you're working with have a good understanding of, the railroad auditors will take exceptions correctly, and then you'll have to manage those and potentially even give money back to the railroads for some sort of overbilling. As most of you know, that the 500 byte data file that comes from the shop, it's coming out of a software system, car repair billing. Most of the software programs have some sort of metrics for you to add, remove, edit those component IDs for wheels, side frames, couplers, etc. And again, my hardest part was trying to not dig in too deep without painting too of a brush here. So I'm available for you to pick any of these bullet points, and you can call me or email me, and we can go through them on a much more, pardon me, I've lost the word there, on an in-depth conversation. To the point I was talking about with my coworkers and the car repair billing data exchange system and reload. Shop invoices, refusing. JI stands for joint inspection. JR stands for joint rebuttal. DC stands for defect card. In fact, if you have a railroad that has issued a defect card that covers all of the damage, you actually don't have to submit a JIC. So you can bill directly off of the defect card if it's applicable. A DM would be a dismantled unit, and then a DE would be a destroyed unit. So understanding the different source codes is important. Obviously, understanding the AAR office manual billing guidelines is very important. The car repair billing procedure manual is a whole nother book that I open from time to time, and I refer to all of these manuals to help me do my day-to-day job. But there are so many critical errors that can come back from a RailLink upload as a failure of some sort. And it can take a team of people to figure out what are those errors. So a lot of times you have to go back to the shop and have some sort of communication. Maybe they registered a component ID for a side frame in their system and then gave it to you in some sort of billing repair card component ID, but they didn't associate it correctly in UMLR. And then when you go to load the railroad rebill into data exchange at RailLink, they're going to say timeout, something doesn't match up here, and it rejects the file. So it could take a team of people to go back and figure out what's the missing link here. Component IDs is only one of the things that would lead to a critical error or a failure. I won't go through all of them. The behind the scenes management, again, that's a whole team of people that are making sure that invoices are processed correctly, that railroad rebilling is set up correctly. To the best of my knowledge, each carrier can only be billed once per car owner per month. So for instance, Kathy is a client of RAS Data Services. I manage railroad damaged cars for Kathy. Let's say that Kathy has 7 cars that are damaged by the CSX. And where we're going to send one invoice for all of that damage, and that's going to include anything else that Duke has to bill to the BNSF. Same for CSX or NS or UP. They can only get one bill from each car owner per month. In the event that there are multiple railroads that need to be billed by your company per month, that means that you have multiple invoices going out to multiple railroads. So you could have multiple critical failures. I know that a lot of times things don't get caught till the 11th hour. There's a timeline in order to submit a window in order to submit railroad rebilling. And it seems like a lot of time you're trying to jam an awful lot into data exchange in a very short period of time at the end of every month. And it can be cumbersome if you get a lot of critical errors. The way to avoid a lot of that is work with some fantastic shops that they don't put, I'm going to say, garbage in, garbage out. If they don't put garbage into your system and they provide you with a good look ahead of time, then a lot of those critical errors can be avoided. And the ones that do pop up, it makes a lot easier. Your rebills is again something that can be managed by folks internally or externally. When did we rebill the railroad? When did we get our cash? If we didn't get our cash, why didn't we get our cash? And then you have to make sure that you're tracing accordingly. Speaking of potentially not getting cash, there's a process after you rebill the railroad where they're going to audit for accuracy. So this would be the handling of AAR exceptions and or rejection letters. Once you submit the rebill through RailLink, there's obviously AAR audit guidelines that are going to be followed. If the exceptions taken on an invoice exceed a percentage threshold that's outlined in the office manual, and it's tiered based on the volume of the invoice, it can either be an exception or it could be a complete rejection of the whole invoice. So managing an exception to a bill versus a rejection to a bill are two completely scenarios. I think it goes without being said, you put the higher priority on a rejection. Your job is to assess what the exceptions are, work with the shop or the car owner to identify the problems, and then agree to disagree if need be, but get the the invoice resubmitted at a time for resubmitting a rejected invoice as well. And if you exceed that timeline, again, there is the chance that the bill will not be paid. In the event that it's an exception letter, what you're going to do is still work with the shops and the car owners to manage those exceptions, and then you're going to send responses. Hopefully the railroad agrees with your responses, and then you don't see those exceptions anymore. But that could be a post billing negotiation. And at times we do find that maybe there's an ambiguity in the rule, and party A and party B are interpreting it differently. Or there needs to be further clarification on what was billed, why it was billed, et cetera. Again, if you're working with great shops, they're going to help you manage those exceptions. They have the scope of work, they have the write-up, they have the work order, they know what they paid for the components, they know the amount of labor it took. They're usually really, really good at managing the exceptions and rejects, but you have to have a metric in place in order to track those yourself. To in the invoice is rejected, you'll actually have to edit the data before you resubmit it. In the event that it's just an exception, you can allow, please feel free to reach out. The last point I have there is agreeing to disagree at times. Sometimes two parties just can't, they can't come together, and there might be a little bit of gray area in the rule, and you have to take it on an individual car by car basis. It's a discussion between the car owner, the shop, the third party, and maybe somebody like myself. Do we allow this exception and move on, or do we continue to try to combat it? I find that, and reach out to the other party taking the exception, and maybe that's via email as well. You can have the exception that you're taking. Can we talk about further? And sometimes by sharing some documents, maybe some drawings, maybe getting a different assessment from the needed to be done. Some of those exceptions can actually then be disallowed by the railroad themselves, and they'll say, okay, we have a better understanding of how that form. But the goal of somebody like myself, that they're going to recoup all of their money, and that's always a contention point. So, some effort to make that happen. Going on to the next slide, some miscellaneous items. AR rule interpretation requests. Again, I said there's a lot of gray area in some of the rules, or party A and party B might disagree on something. So you can petition the AAR to review a matter, and they'll take it to a committee and actually, which I've had to do a few times. AAR arbitration is something that I personally have not been a part of, but if you get to a point where party A and party B cannot agree on a matter with an interchange matter, or it's a billing dispute, there is a process for going to arbitration. It completely spelled out in the represent themselves accordingly. Some sort of dialogue to send results so that all of us who understanding of what do people go to arbitration over and how, and
Guess we'll give it another second and see if Brandon unfreezes. Oh, we lost him.
Oh, no. There he is. Oh, no, is he?
And, oh,
I think I only,
oh, here we go.
can you folks hear me?
There we go.
Yeah, we can.
Okay. We're back in business. I apologize for that. I don't know if that was on my end or not. We'll move on from arbitration, and we can just, we talked about the JIC auto endorsement protection. We talked about spirit of the rule discussions, fingerprints for multiple parties for failing to recognize undocumented damage. And then a lot of times, again, unknown damage or undocumented damage. A lot of it just comes down to health test. Open dialogue between the carriers involved, the customers involved, and third parties like myself. And if everybody plays fairly, this should generally be a pretty easy process to manage. I think that carriers, do you have the ability to get on the phone and just talk it out? Because sometimes you can't say everything you want to say in an email, or maybe it doesn't come across correctly. Let's open this up, for questions. Again, I can't stress enough the difficulty in right here trying to compress a Comptel road damage into a short presentation. The A to Z of how to manage this would take months to sit down and learn and then explain. So I tried my best to do a broad brush, in hopes that the Q&A session would net maybe some results for everybody if they have specific questions. And then here at the end, please contact me at any time. I'd be more than happy to discuss any of this with any parties off thread. And Melinda, I think I asked her, if you don't mind, if you could share this information with everybody that's here. That way they know how to get in touch with me.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I know this is a lot to get through, and thanks everybody for sticking with us. Please feel free to type in any of your questions, or if you actually want to unmute yourself and ask a question, that's fine as well. My first question, which my chat box just went away. Okay, here we go. No, it still went away. Okay, so first question here is, I have had a car that was involved in a derailment. The car was not entered in DDCT. I was told by the Class 1 mechanical person that there was no extensive damage. Then the car was sent to a shop on a different Class 1 railroad by the first Class 1, and then the car was deemed to be scrapped, and settlement was offered. Now we are receiving billing from both railroads. We have been disputing the billing, however, they are not removing the invoice. Is there a better way to handle this?
I'm so sorry to tell you this. That's absolutely terrible. But it does come up quite often. It's I would say the only thing that I suggest both parties on an email and say, here's what I know from A to Z. Here's the car was here, it got over here, or party A took responsibility. How could I possibly be responsible for freight to move this car? Let's go back to who was responsible for damaging it. Let's go back to who was responsible for making the mistake of sending the car in. Let's determine who's gonna pay this bill or not pay this bill. Freight claims and commodity claims are handled outside of the DDCT process. So I just hope that you're working with two carriers that are reasonable. whoever, I'm so sorry, whoever asked the question, if they don't have the proper contacts for either one of the carriers involved, tell them to email me. I'd be more than happy to send a contact if I have it to further that discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Next question. If the car owner and the railroad disagree on the shop that will do the repairs, is there any way for the owner to get the car to the shop that they prefer? Uh-oh. There we go.
This is area repair.
Say that again, you froze. Uh-oh.
So sorry, I don't know if I cut out. There are times where the 107, the damaging carrier has the ability to manage handling carrier repairs themselves. If they want to send the car to a contract shop of their choice, they have to do it with car owner approval. As to why they wouldn't agree to a secondary contract, if they wanted to, let's say, class private shop or their own network shop with car owner approval, they should be able to do that. But if they want to send it to a private, say, satellite shop, I believe they have to do it with car owner approval.
It was suggested that maybe if you turn your video off, Brandon, maybe you won't freeze. It'll take less bandwidth. Maybe we could try that. Sorry.
I just turned the video off, so let me know if that helps.
Okay, yeah. Right now you're crystal clear. Okay.
Okay.
If the person that wrote that question doesn't feel like that got answered in clear language when it wasn't garbly, let me know and we'll get it re-answered for you there.
Melinda, they can call me directly on my cell phone after this. 773-290-9398.
Okay, great. And then our next question is, does DDCT automatically notify car owners of a destroyed car?
So in the event that the proper parties are listed in findus.rail, a DDCT notification will go out in the event that the settlement has been offered by the railroad. Now, a lot of the carriers that we work with years ago, we started suggesting that if they are going to create a Rule 107 DDCT record and they're going to request actual DV dispo with the intent of offset, and we ask them to please put a note that says deemed destroyed. That tells everybody, don't go wasting your time trying to find a home shop to accept this. The minute you give us the settlement value in the system, we're going to settlement. If you provide the disposition, provide the value system, when the railroad offers settlement, a DDCT notification will go to the findus.rail parties and it will tell you that a settlement has been offered. That's going to go to the mark owner.
Got it. Okay, and that is our final question. If anybody has anything else that they want to ask and unmute themselves, we can do that. And then if not, we know we went a little bit over here, but we appreciate you sticking with us. We know for many of you, this is a really important topic. And as Brandon has said, feel free to reach out to him at any point in time, and I will get that contact information to all of you. So now I'll turn it back over to Kathy.
I won't keep you long. I just want to say thank you, everyone, so much. We kept 50 people for even 20 minutes over. So thank you very much. Thank you, Brandon. Obviously, a very expansive topic and very difficult to cover in a short period of time. But we very much appreciate your time and your sharing your knowledge. So thank you, everyone. And we will see everybody later. Thanks.
Thank you.
We're forgetting. That's Chris.